This is a Weather Insight special briefing coverage on the Texas Hill Country flooding. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. We're recording this at 4 o'clock Central Time on Sunday, July 6th. And the latest that we have, this information is about 2 hours old. 59 fatalities, 38 adults and 21 children. 11 children and one counselor missing from Camp Mystic. 8 injuries. Other unaccounted person numbers remain fluid. 400 responders actively searching at this time, 20 agencies deployed. 12 of those are canine units and over 100 air and ground units involved in search and rescue missions. Jeff, this has been a tragedy to say the least. And all we can do now really is just kind of look at the information that we have and that's what we're going to take a look at this afternoon is the rivers and expectations moving forward over the next several days.
Yeah, it was. This is certainly a tough one. You look back and we have the 59 fatalities just on the Guadalupe portion of this event. We also had the 16 to 20 inches of rain that then fell the following night up northwest of Austin, northwest Travis County, southern Burnett County, and east and western Williamson County. And we had fatalities there also along Cow Creek and Hamilton Creek. These are normally dry creeks, and those creeks came up to catastrophic levels, washing away bridges, washing away homes, RVs, and stuff like that. And so we've had, I think, around 9 fatalities in addition to what has happened on the Guadalupe River up northwest of Austin. Then there's also one fatality out in Tom Green County, out in the San Angelo area, which had flooding the same night as the Guadalupe flooding. And so that brings the state death toll to around 69 or 70, which has now surpassed Harvey. And so this is one of the more deadlier events that we've seen in the state of Texas in a long time. And there's just so many factors, and we can kind of go into some of that. We can do a really deep dive into some of the forecast and all that, when it's a more appropriate time. But I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of the geography out here. The hill country is extraordinarily prone to flash flooding. And, we hear flash flooding here in Houston. We think about, the water comes up into the streets. It's a very different ball game out in Central Texas in the hill country when you have flash flooding. It's not the water rises and it sits and then it goes down. It's very fast moving, at times walls of water that come down what are normally dry creeks and streams, or maybe a little bit of water. We're talking ankle or knee-high water running through them on a normal day. And you can get a very quick response in these creeks and streams with rainfall, especially the type of rainfall that we get here on the Gulf Coast. They get the same type of rainfall out there in Central Texas and Southwest Texas. It's not common, it's infrequent, but it does happen. And, so I'll go into a little bit of the geography here, with the Kerr County event and the Guadalupe River. So just to kind of get your bearings here a little bit, this is the city of Kerrville. These dots here indicate the gauges that are in place along the Guadalupe River. So we have a gauge here at the Kerrville on the upstream or the west side of Kerrville. Gauge a little bit further upstream where Bear Creek comes in. This is a tributary to the Guadalupe River at Johnson Creek, north of Ingram, Texas. This is the gauge that's getting kind of all the attention. This is the Guadalupe River at Hunt. So this gauge is on Highway 39, just east of the town of Hunt, Texas. And at Hunt, Texas, that is where the river kind of breaks, and the river breaks into a South Fork and a North Fork. I'm going to zoom in really close here. So this is the town of Hunt, the small town of Hunt. This is the river gauge here east. This becomes the North Fork of the Guadalupe River, and this is the South Fork of the Guadalupe River. And it's the South Fork that kind of runs down through this area. That is the more populated. There's more structures, there's more housing. This is where a lot of the camps are, the summer camps that are built down along the river. A lot of RV parks are, as well as down east of Hunt over towards Ingram and even down to Kerrville. So this is a very populated area, of this river. A lot of low-lying areas right near the river, or even in the river. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit here to show you this is the last river gauge on the Guadalupe River, just downstream of Hunt. We did have one here on the North Fork, just west of the city of Hunt, but there is nothing on the South Fork here of the Guadalupe River upstream of Hunt or west of Hunt. And I'll zoom out a little bit more to kind of give you the geography of how this kind of comes together. So you can see the North Fork of the Guadalupe River starts here just east of Highway 83. And so it's not a significant drainage area on the North Fork above the city of Hunt. And then the South Fork here, again, kind of starts here near the county line with Bandera County and just, again, east of Highway 83. So there's not a big drainage area also on the South Fork. But the problem is that there's also no gauges on neither one of these forks really too much west of Hunt. Again, we have this one gauge here on the North Fork a little bit to the west. But on the South Fork, there's no gauges down through here. And a gauge gives you the water level and the time and how quickly the water is rising and that type of stuff. And so um, the folks here kind of upstream of Hunt on the South Fork of this river didn't have really anything to look at with respect to river gauges to know how quickly the water was rising upstream. And unfortunately, when we also look at the rainfall, so this is the Coco Ross rainfall. So we have official rainfall reporting stations like the gauge stations, which we didn't have any up here. And then we also have people who can monitor the rainfall at their house and report to this Coco Ross system. And again, here's the North Fork of the Guadalupe River upstream of Hunt. Here's the South Fork of the Guadalupe River upstream of Hunt. And once again, not a single rainfall observation was reported in this really critical area where these flood waves were generated, especially down here on the South Fork. Of course, we do have radar that we can use to estimate how much it's raining, and the radar did indicate upstream of Hunt rainfall amounts of anywhere from 10 to potentially 12 inches up in this area. But the actual physical gauge report, the highest we saw was about 9.4 inches right there just east of Hunt or west of Ingram, Texas. And so you get this kind of area up here that's void of any data minus what the radar was showing. The other issue kind of got into on that Thursday night, Friday morning was what we call the rainfall rate. And Scott, you and I talk about this a lot with respect to it's how fast the rain falls. You know, you can
Yeah.
get 5, 10, 15 inches of rain, you spread it out over 4 or 5 days. That's very different than 10 inches of rain in a couple of hours. And what we've seen over the hill country this weekend, both in the Marble Falls Lago Vista event and then also down on the Guadalupe River, is these really intense. We're talking 3, 4, 5 inches. We actually had an LCRA gauge at Lago Vista record almost 7 inches of rain in an hour on Friday night. And so these are incredible rainfall rates falling on those of you that have been out to this area. This is very hilly, rocky, almost concrete-like terrain. And so
Yeah.
you put those types of rainfall rates on that type of terrain, and you get very quick runoff. And I'm going to zoom in here because I'm trying to paint the picture of this. I'm going to zoom in here, and
Hmm.
you can see here on the topography map, there's topography here. This is a very hilly area for those of you that have been out here. But what also this is the river. This is the Guadalupe River here that runs right along kind of Highway 39. But notice in between these kind of hills, you see these little indentions. These are little creeks all along here that feed into the river. And these creeks kind of take the drainage from the hills and bring that water very quickly down into the river. You can see it here on the North Fork also. And that brings that water very quickly down to the river. And so this is how you sort of generate what we call a flood wave. And it's not necessarily a wall of water, it's not 30 feet high that smashes through, but it is a very quick rise in the water. And I did look at the gauge at Hunt. So the gauge at Hunt was destroyed by this flood, but the water level at Hunt rose in 1 hour. It rose 12.7 feet. So that's, a very quick rise of water. And in 2 hours, it rose 20.6 feet. So that's at the Hunt gauge. And that occurred in the morning hours between about 3:30 in the morning and the gauge stopped reporting at 4:35. And the gauge stopped reporting at 29.5 feet. And so we don't, obviously, the water might have got higher than that. We don't know. This is what data collection and high water marks would be for, to determine did the water go higher than when the gauge stopped reporting. Interestingly enough, down at Kerrville, okay, so the Hunt gauge is here. This gauge is the one that was destroyed, stopped reporting about 4:30 in the morning. Downstream here at the Kerrville gauge, it was also having some data issues um, reporting during this time. So I'm not 100% confident in the data that came out of this gauge here at Kerrville, but between 2:45 and 3:45 a.m., that river gauge showed it went from 1.7 to 23.4 feet. So that's a 21.7 foot rise in 1 hour. And then the gauge stopped reporting also at Kerrville. So it could have got higher there also. And right now, this appears to be the second highest flood. So for those that have been around for a while here, this is the same kind of area that had the big devastating flood back in July of 1987. And we had 10 fatalities down here at Comfort, Texas, with a school bus of kids, again, evacuating one of these camps down here. And they got caught at a low water crossing. The bus was swept away. There's 43 kids on that bus. 10 of them did not make it. And so this area is very prone to big flash flood events when you get these types of rainfalls. And so it's just, the combination, unfortunately, of the atmospheric factors, the weather factors, the rainfall rates, the rocky terrain, the topography you have out here, and then, of course, unfortunately, on a holiday weekend, and very much like Wimberley 2015 on the Blanco River, you have a lot of people in the hill country, in what is normally, like I mentioned, these kind of dry riverbeds, and maybe not quite accustomed to how quickly or the know of how quickly the water can rise out here. And so, obviously, there's lots of other factors. For a later date that we can get into that went into this, the forecast and all that kind of stuff. And I will say there was hints out here in Southwest Texas. Obviously, we had Tropical Storm Barry, and that system sort of disappeared. Kind of came up west of the Rio Grande and into this part of Texas, and it kind of intermingled with what we call a mid-level trough. It's just a weakness or a low pressure trough. And in the summertime in the state of Texas, that's a fairly favorable setup for some heavy rainfall because you just have suitable lift, but you're in this tropical, really tropical type of air mass, and so storms can develop and they don't move a whole lot. And since they're in these big tropical air masses, they can really produce a lot of rain. And the Del Rio sounding, I'm getting a little technical here, but the Del Rio sounding, so Del Rio's right over here, the Hunt area, Kerrville's right here,
Mhm.
Del Rio's over in this area, and the Del Rio sounding had a precipitable water value of around 2.3, 2.4 inches on the evening of July 3rd, right before this event happened. And what that means is there's a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere from down here where we live all the way up to the top of the atmosphere. And so if you are looking at a flash flood type forecast situation, you can kind of take that precipitable water value and multiply it by up to 6 or 10 and kind of get you the rainfall amounts that you can get out of it. So this was an incredibly supercharged air mass to produce big, heavy rainfall. And we saw that twice. We saw it once here on the Guadalupe River on the Thursday, Friday morning, and then again northwest of Austin in northwest of Travis County there on the Friday night, Saturday morning with even bigger totals. We're talking 16, 18 inches that fell in those areas there just northwest of Austin. And so again, kind of a flood prone area. I will touch a little bit on, the questions about is this going to come downstream? Is it going to cause a lot of flooding downstream? This area has been in a really historic long-term drought out here. They kind of needed the rainfall. And so all of the flood wave that moved down the Guadalupe River, so this is the Guadalupe River here, goes through Comfort, Texas, and then down here to Spring Branch, Texas, and then it goes into Canyon Lake right here. And Canyon Lake was really, really far below normal pool. And I think the lake has only come up 7 or 8 feet with this flood wave that has come into it. So the entire flow of this flood has gone into Canyon Lake and has been absorbed by the lake. So there's no floodgate operations or anything going on in Canyon Lake. And the same thing has happened up here, northwest of Austin. We had the Llano River. So this is the Highland Lakes chain right here. So the Highland Lakes includes Lake Travis down here north of Austin, and then you go up to Lake Marble Falls, Inks Lake, and eventually all the way up to Lake Buchanan. And we've had significant inflows from the Llano River that came into Lake LBJ and Lake Marble Falls. So El Seri did do floodgate operations on those two lakes to pass those flows downstream, and then they had held that water in Lake Travis. Lake Travis is so far below normal pool. Again, just like at Canyon Lake, the water's gone in there. They're able to hold that water. No floodgate operations were needed at Lake Travis. And even up here at Lake Buchanan, the big flood that came down the San Saba River has been absorbed into Lake Buchanan. And so that's kind of what these lakes are there for, but they were significantly low, and that's allowed those floodways to be absorbed into. And so there's really no downstream impacts on the Colorado or the Guadalupe River. You can see these points here on the Colorado and on the Guadalupe downstream. That is actually not water that fell upstream. That's water that fell downstream or below these dams yesterday along the I-35 corridor. And so you're getting a little bit of a flood wave that's coming down these rivers. But this is really not that big of a deal for any of these locations.
Yeah. And thinking back Thursday night and Friday, the radar loop was just showing the system just kind of spinning. It had really essentially formed its own low pressure over the area where they were getting tons of rain and it wasn't going anywhere. And we talked about this earlier, Jeff. It's similar to what we see in October sometimes with tropical systems. They try to move in, but by October, the fronts are sort of blocking them. And sometimes you get these setups where these tropical storms just kind of stall out and spin and stay in one place. And that was the case with this. And we also talked a little bit about there is additional heavy rain, but it's shifted kind of north of 35 corridor between Fort Worth, Stephenville, down to the Brownwood area, and that is, fortunately, that is not the same setup that we saw Thursday, Friday night. So there are flood warnings, flood advisories, and things like that, but nothing like what we saw Thursday, Friday night.
Yeah, and we're not completely out of the woods yet here in Central Texas. Let me zoom out here a little bit. Everything you see in this kind of lighter pale green is a flash flood watch that goes, I believe, until 7 or 10 o'clock tonight here for the I-35 corridor counties and then west out into the hill country. And last night we got through the night. We did not see any of the big what I'll call a rain bomb like we saw the previous two nights. So we made it through last night without them. And these systems like this, these kind of mid-level troughs, and at sometimes these kind of meso lows that form with them, they very much behave like a tropical system. And tropical systems like to focus their heavy rainfall near their kind of circulation centers in the nighttime hours, and then during the daytime they kind of what we call breathe. So the precipitation will kind of dissipate near those circulation centers, and you'll get into these kind of bands and the more scattered precipitation. That's what we're kind of seeing this afternoon. And so, again, tonight we go into the question of, do we get any sort of concentrated, really heavy rainfall in any specific location out here? And it is possible. The models have kind of been hinting at this off and on. I wouldn't say there's a real strong signal for additional big rains, but you're given this really tropical air mass. It has shown its capabilities over the last couple of days of producing extraordinary rainfall. So it certainly is a possibility that we could get another one of these very isolated areas that kind of anchor down and you get these big totals. And then something to really point out is that these have just been really isolated. If you look at the Guadalupe situation, it was just really western Kerr County, down into central Kerr County where they had the big rainfall. We're talking a half a county, and that was the extent of it. If you go further to the south and everything, these rainfall totals drop off really quick. This is Kerr County right here. This is where the maximum totals fell. We're talking less than an inch back down here towards Real County, and only 4 inches here into northern Bandera County. And so this is how these types of systems behave. They produce these really incredible totals in a small area. And unfortunately, where that small area happens, it's where you're going to get that devastating flooding. This could have just as easily been on the Frio River or any other number of normally dry creeks and rivers that are out here. I mean, if you just kind of zoom out on this map, you can see they're everywhere out here in the hill country, up towards Junction, near Fredericksburg. This is why this area is so prone, the hilly nature, these big rainfalls to these flash floods that come down. And in addition to that, there's a lot of infrastructure that tends to be built down along these creek beds. You know, you have low water crossings here. It's not like here in Houston and our bayous where the bridges kind of go over. Out there in the hill country, the roads go down into these creek beds. You drive down into it, you drive through it. And so that obviously creates a danger in these types of situations when the water can come up. And it also creates a big problem in the aftermath, as we're seeing along the Guadalupe River, where that infrastructure has been heavily impacted. You know, roads are washed away, bridges are washed away, water treatment plants have been washed away, water supply systems have been flooded and damaged, and even the electrical system in both Kerrville and Ingram and Hunt were inundated, which resulted in a lot of the power outages out there. And so, you know, that there's just when you build down in these kind of areas out here in these flash flood areas, it can create a lot of issues when you get these big floods like this. And so we're not totally out of the woods yet. I think, you know, if we can get through tonight out in this area, I think we'll finally begin to kind of come out of this pattern. You know, Scott, thinking back, um, I don't know the pattern set up for July 1987. I'll have to do a little bit of looking at that. But this pattern reminds me a lot of July 2002. And for those of you that remember July 2002, it was a great big widespread flood out in this part of Texas. Lake Medina overtopped its spillway. You had Canyon Lake reach very high levels. Rainfall totals were much higher than this. We're talking 20, 30, 40 inches out here in Southwest Texas. But it's a very similar setup and pattern. And we've seen this time to time. You get this very light weakness, you get some tropical moisture involved, and it just goes, and you get these just incredible rainfall totals. And I think, you know, we've been taken aback a little bit that we've been so kind of dry and in drought in the state for a while. We've kind of forgotten 2015 and 2016, where we had this type of thing happen multiple times, not only in the hill country, but here in the Houston area up in North Texas, where we got these, you know, for lack of a better term, rain bombs that would happen. And, you know, you get 10, 20 inches of rain in 12 hours or so, and there's just catastrophic flash flooding that comes with that. And unfortunately, in this part of the state, the loss of life can be very high, especially when you put it on a holiday time, a holiday, you know, weekend, Memorial Day with Wimberley and the Blanco River, and now the Guadalupe River with the Fourth of July weekend.
Yeah. And ironic, last year at this time we were dealing with Beryl, so different situation, but still, these things can happen in July, and it's difficult. You know, we meteorologists we can pick up the general areas that the heavy rain's going to occur and the amounts approximately, but to pick out and pinpoint a very specific spot where it's going to rain a foot, you know, these incredible rainfall amounts in a short period of time. Still very difficult to do, but like you said, we will dive into the meteorology more at a later date. The good news is, I think, anyway, the silver lining as far as for the rest of the week outlook, anyway, we are expecting some ridging to build in and eventually take over to diminish rain chances really all over Texas. We do have an upper level low that's going to be moving along the coast towards southeast Texas, bringing rain chances, increasing rain chances for southeast Texas along the coast, especially for Monday and Tuesday. But hopefully that region will take over and things will start drying out in central Texas for the rest of this week.
And one thing I'll add just real quickly here, you know, there's three things. First, there's temporary flight restriction in place for reasons out in Kerr County. We have numerous air assets doing search and rescue operations. Flying private drones is interferes with rescue operations. If it's a flood, if it's a wildfire, if you're flying any sort of private drone out there, that interferes with the air operations that are going on. So that's why there's a temporary flight restriction in place for this area, along with some other search and rescue assets that are being brought in by the state National Guard that require air contained airspace, you know, at around 18,000 feet or so. So that's one thing I want to put out there. Second, you don't need to go out there and take photos. This is an active search and rescue operation. These are two-lane roads out there that are difficult to get down on a normal day with traffic, and people out there that don't need to be out there, that are just out there looking around, are hindering getting resources into where they need these resources. And so please stay out of this area. The search and rescue operation will eventually end at some point, and that is when folks can go and look around and do all that type of stuff. If you have property out there, your property's okay, you can make a phone call instead of driving out there and actually physically putting eyes on it. Make a phone call to somebody's out there. Do that right now instead of putting more traffic on these very small roads and burdening those local officials with having to do traffic control when the focus is really on the search and rescue operations. And then lastly, donations. I've had a lot of questions about donations. Donation management in a situation like this and disasters is a big, big challenge for the emergency management, the county, the local jurisdictions. People send a lot of stuff, and it's not necessarily stuff that people need. It's monetary, and a lot of people like to send money. They don't feel like they know where their funds are going or where their money's going. Believe me, these folks have plenty of water. They have plenty of food. The state is surging all kinds of resources into this area. The federal government is surging all kinds of resources with that food, water, supplies, gas, all that is being taken care of. But people who have lost their homes, lost their belongings, what they need is they need monetary donations, to get them through. If they need to go get a meal at Chick-fil-A or somewhere like that, or they need to go to Home Depot or Lowe's to buy some materials, or they need hotel rooms for the night or for several nights. That is where those monetary donations kind of come in to bridge them between now and when insurance comes in or when federal aid comes in to kind of help start that new normal and recovery process. So really, really kind of take stock of that. And I've posted on my Facebook. Scott, you could share it on Weather Insights for vetted organizations that the state and the counties are kind of trying to push everybody toward to give monetary donations. So you know that A, your money's going to a reputable source, and B, it will get to these folks that need it the most. And so just keep that in mind here. And the last thing I'll say is just really be cautious with spreading information. There's information that's not true, that's being posted on social media. We see this in all the disasters. We kind of have to remind people of that. But misinformation is out there, rumors are out there. You really get your sources from the official pages, the Kerr County, the Sheriff's Office, the City of Kerrville, Travis County up in the northern areas that were hit, Burnett County, Lago Vista, Marble Falls, those areas. TxDOT for travel information. The National Weather Service has great pages here for where you can get the water levels and the river information. But just be careful. There's just a lot of stuff out there, a lot of things on Facebook, and X and Twitter and Instagram of showing various kind of things that get spread around very quickly, and rumors can spread very quickly in situations like this. And so just kind of keep all that in mind as we're working through this here over the next several days.
Yeah. Get your information from trusted sources, government agencies, and we'll pass along information right here on Weather Insights, as Jeff mentioned. You can stay in touch with us via social media and our Weather Insights page. We'll return next Sunday with tropical updates. Until then, Jeff, thank you very much.